Hey guys, today we're going to be looking at early India and the caste system. But before we get started, I have a special friend here today to share an amazing joke with you.
All right, here it is, grade 10. Why did the Dalit have a broken leg?
Yep, why?
Because he did not have a cast.
You get it? You get it?
Worst joke ever.
Great. Alright guys, thank you for humoring me with that. If you did not get the joke, by the end of this video, you will get the joke. Alright, but first, I want to talk about early India in the formative period. So what we're going to be discussing here in just a minute is the Vedic age and the Epic age, 1500 to 1000 BC, and 1000 to 600 BC. And this is the period of time when the Aryans, and I hope I'm pronouncing that right, are coming down from the Hindu Kush mountains and entering into India and taking over, basically becoming the dominant people group there. But before we look at that, I want to look at the period of time before that, that is all around this Indus River right here. So before that, we have a group of people known as the Harappan civilization. And unfortunately, it doesn't look like this map is showing up very clearly for you guys, but the Harappan civilization was based around the Indus River, one of the early civilizations from 3600 BC, 1500 BC. The civilization was located in what is now Pakistan, Afghanistan, and the western part of India. They had a very advanced social organization and technological innovation. There's a number of really interesting things about this group, I talked about it a little bit in the last video, and I'll touch on it again in a couple minutes here, but I do want you guys to keep in mind, right, it's one of the early civilizations. When we think of them, they're up there with the Chinese River civilization, they're up there with the Nile River, the Egyptians, and they're up there with the Mesopotamians around the Tigris and Euphrates. And so all of these four early civilizations, this is one of the big ones. The Indus Valley farming, pre-Aryan civilization. So it was super fertile. One of the key parts of this, like, way people were able to live and grow is because it was around this river, and they were able to grow wheat and barley, etc. And they also are an early example of exporting the surplus. And so how do you think they actually did that export? Well, I'll tell you. They were able to do the export by using the river. So it was one of those things where they were one of the earliest examples of successful maritime trading, right? All based around this Indus River that led into the ocean. So we come back here, you can see where it actually leads into the ocean. And so they were able to actually do legit maritime trading really early on. So there's a number of cities along the Indus Valley. More than 100 cities were located in the Indus Valley River. The Harappans built a civilization located throughout. Mohenjo-daro, make sure I'm saying that right, was one of the big ones. Each city was designed in a grid pattern. So one of the interesting things we can learn from that, right, is the fact that they were designed in a grid pattern. It means that, A, they had zoning, right, and they had formal government, which is mind-blowing in that sense, right? One of the early civilizations, they had this formal zoning, formal government. They were growing, and all of this was happening around the time of the Egyptian Middle Kingdom, and also around the end of Sargon to Hammurabi, the Babylonians and the Akkadians. I don't know if that means anything to you, but that's all was going on during that time. One of the things they also brought to us, right, is first indoor plumbing, right? I mentioned that last video. Heyo! That's pretty amazing. Another really interesting fact about these early Indus River Valley people, they were peaceful, right? Like, through all of the excavation and all of the exploration of these people groups, barely any weapons have actually been found, which some say maybe that's why that they don't exist anymore. That's why we don't know anything more about them. Another theory of why those cities are no longer around is the changing of the water waves, the flooding, the monsoon season, like I talked in the last video, could have had an impact on them. Whatever it may be, there's a number of different theories, whatever it may be. We come along then to our next age, right? And this is the Aryans coming in, the Indo-Europeans, invasion and immigration. And so we end up having a group of people, Indo-Europeans, move from Central Asia into the Indus River Valley in North India around 1500 BC. This is known as the Vedic age. Due to their superior weapons, they became the ruling class. And one of the big things that occurred with the Aryans then when they came in is they had a shift from hunting and herding to agriculture. And this is something you really want to remember, right? Is when during the Vedic and Epic Age, when the Aryans migrated to India and changed their lifestyles, they were hunting and herding before, but then they actually became agricultural, and they adapted a lot of Indian habits, and they became part of like the Indian social structure as well. A few of the things that the Aryans introduced into India was the iron plow, iron weapons, the horse chariot, and another key one, and this is key, a new language called Sanskrit. And on the next slide, I'll show you an example here. Another thing they also did was organize the people into tribes based on ethnicity, and this would eventually morph into the caste system. So one of the great things about this Sanskrit, and here's an example of it, it is actually one of the first written language of the people group that lived in India and South Asia, in the subcontinent. And having these writings actually tells us a lot about the early culture. So it's the first written developed language, and one of the first things we find is something called Vedas, and that translates roughly to knowledge. And they were sacred books written in Sanskrit. Now, the books were actually stories and epics and poems. There was a lot of different things going on there. And one of the very first Vedas, and most famous Vedas, was the Rig Veda. It was the first epic written by Brahmin priests, right? So it's the first epic written by Brahmin priests. There's 1,028 hymns to the Aryan gods in that. In this Vedic age, we have the very beginning signs of a caste system, right? And one thing to keep in mind, we're going to look at these various castes. Well, I'll get to that in a second. So then we come into the Epic Age from 1000 to 600 BC. And we have a couple other writings. Wish me luck here, Mahabharata and the Ramayana. Mahabharata and the Ramayana. I mean, no matter how many times I try, I still mess it up. And those are a couple of other writings. These writings come from the Epic Age. They deal with mystical battles, and they also displayed a more settled culture, right? A more agricultural culture as well. And then Aryan social and family structure influencing the society. So we're starting to see a more Aryan social and family structure during the Epic Age, which brings us to the next slide. It was during the Epic Age we see the development. During the Epic Age, we see the development of patriarchal society and very, very clear hierarchies. While it began to form during the Vedic Age, it very clearly became patriarchal and hierarchical during the Epic Age. So, a hierarchical society. Aryans mixed with locals and selected local village chief, not an Aryan. So essentially, as they moved in and took over, they had to basically set people in place, where they were going to be, how that was going to look. The patriarchal, which means a society ruled by man, also came in place during this age. And we have something called Varnas, which is what we know today as the caste system. And we're going to look at that a lot because it is a big part of India, not even just back then, but also today. We still see it today. And so this caste system was started all the way back in like as early as 1500 BC, which is nuts. The Varnas are a social system that controls your social rank and status in society. So one of the interesting things along that lines as well, and we'll look at the various castes. We have the Brahmin, the Sutriyas, I know it starts with a K is silent, Satriyas, the Vaishyas, I was struggle with that one too, and the Shudras. And then not mentioned on here is a group of untouchables that are not, they consider casteless, and they're deletes. And we'll look at that on the next slide. But one thing you want to remember is initially, right here we have the Brahmins at the top, and the Satriyas down below. Initially, when the Aryans first entered into India, the Satriyas were at the top. And it was because this was the warrior class, right? And so when they were taking over, the warrior class was leading the way. And the Brahmins being the more priest class or the knowledge-based class, they came into power once the Aryans became more settled. So let's look at this class system that developed. So, why? Non-Aryans were seen as inferior to Aryans, right? And so they needed to set up a system to make sure that everybody knew who was at the top, who was the best, etc. But there's some key things within this caste system. One, people are born into a caste and cannot leave it. And we'll look more at this later on, but within their religion and this whole idea of reincarnation, so you can't leave your caste, but if you do a really good job at your caste and you die, then when you come back, you'll come back as a higher caste. So there was this motivation intrinsic within all of them to say, hey, we need to do our best in our caste. We need to be the best caste person we can be so that we can come back as a higher caste the next life. So people are born into it and cannot leave it. The caste determines social status and the type of job even one will hold. And so that's really important to remember as well. One thing that did happen is as time went on, because of how clear those were, there was actually subcastes that developed that would determine even more specifically like your job within that major caste. The two top castes are the Brahmin and the Kshatriyas. And as you can see, right, the Brahmin being the priests and academics, the Kshatriyas being the warriors and kings. But the Vaisyas was the most influential group in spreading Indian culture. So looking at this chart here, we have Brahmins, priests, academics, Kshatriyas, warriors and kings, Vaisyas, merchants and landowners, Shudras as commoners, peasants and servants, and the untouchables or as Dalits for the out of caste, the sweet sweepers, latrine cleaners, the lowest of the lows. Why do you think the Vaisyas were the most influential group in spreading Indian culture? Take a second, write down what you think. Pause the video. All right. If what you said is because they were merchants and traders, then you would be correct, right? The fact that we had a group of people who are actually going out and trading with other culture groups and other groups of people would spread the Indian culture, right? Most of these people, the rest of the group, were more confined to their own home. And so the fact that they were having interactions with other groups outside of India and that they were trading allowed for that to happen. All right, so to recap, we have Brahmins, we have the four major Varnas. We have Brahmins, priests that are intellectual, spiritual leaders. We have Kshatriyas, warriors and aristocrats, protectors of society. Vaisyas, which are merchants, farmers, artisans, skilled producers. Sudras, which are unskilled labor. And then we also have the Dalit, or untouchables, which are outside the caste system. You are going to want to know this stuff for the test, right? So make sure that you have an idea of this. And remember, right, even within these castes, you were stuck in it. It decided who you were for life, and you weren't moving out. All right, so what I want you guys to do now is, let's see, I want to go to the last slide. There we go. Is in your power school, I want you to answer these questions. By implementing the caste system, what was accomplished? And what is a positive and a negative perspective of the caste system? What good things would come out of it? And then how can you apply the caste system to high school? If you were to say like, oh, ICS has a caste system, what kind of caste system would you make? So I want you to go ahead and answer these questions and then submit them. All right. Thank you very much.